principles look like. The first moral principle that emerged in the discussion said the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, depends on the consequences that will result from your action. It indicates morality in the consequences of an act, in the state of the world that will result from the thing you do. But then we went a little further. We considered people were reluctant. People thought it was just wrong, categorically wrong, to kill a person, an innocent person, even for the sake of saving 5 lives. At least people thought that in the second version of each story we considered. So this points to a second categorical way of thinking about moral reasoning. Categorical moral reasoning locates morality in certain absolute moral requirements, certain categorical duties and rights, regardless of the consequences. We're going to explore in the days and weeks to come the contrast between consequentialist and categorical moral principles. The most influential example of consequential moral reasoning is utilitarianism, a doctrine invented by Jeremy Bentham, the 18th century English political philosopher. The most important philosopher of categorical moral reasoning is the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant. So we will look at those two different modes of moral reasoning, assess them, and also consider others. If you look at the syllabus, you'll notice that what makes this enterprise difficult, but also riveting, is that moral and political philosophy is a story, and you don't know where the story will lead, but what you... One way of introducing a course like this would be to promise you that by reading these books and debating these issues, you will become a better, more responsible citizen. You will examine the presuppositions of public policy. You will hone your political... from the discussions we've had. And let's consider what those moral principles look like. The first moral... Last time, we started out last time with some stories, with some moral dilemmas about trolley cars and about doctors and healthy patients vulnerable to being victims of organ transplantation. We noticed two things. Some people argued that there are certain things that are just categorically wrong, even if they bring about a good result, even if they save 5 people at the cost of 1 life. So we contrasted. And so we should base morality, whether we're thinking about what to do in our own lives, or whether as legislators or citizens we're thinking about what the laws should be. The right thing to do individually or collectively. He went, the news account tells us, rather against the advice of his friends. He went in the hopefulness of youthful ambition, thinking the journey would make a man of him. Sadly, dying. So on the 19th day, Dudley, the captain, suggested that they should all have a lottery, that they should draw lots to see who would die to save the rest. Brooks refused. With this basic principle of utility on hand, let's begin to test it and to examine it by turning to another case, another story, but this time not a hypothetical story, a real-life story, the case of the Queen versus Dudley and Stevens. This was a 19th century British law case.
I think it is morally reprehensible, but I think that there's a distinction between what's morally reprehensible and what makes someone legally accountable. In other words, as the judge said, what's always moral isn't necessarily against the law. And while I don't think that necessity justifies theft or murder or any illegal act, at some point your degree of necessity does in fact exonerate you from any guilt.
Okay, good. Other defenders, other voices for the defense, moral justifications for what they did.
I don't think that's a very good reason, because you choose to, it's either way you have to choose who dies, because you either choose to turn and kill the person, which is an active conscious thought to turn, or you choose to push the fat man over, which is also an active conscious action. So either way you're making a choice.
Say a little bit more about why a lottery would make it, in your view, morally permissible. Go ahead.
The way I understood it originally was that was the whole issue, is that the cabin boy was never consulted about whether or not something was going to happen to him, even with the original lottery, whether or not he would be a part of that. It was just decided that he was the one that was going to die.
Right, that's what happened in the actual case.
Right.
But if a pretty sizable majority. Now let's see what people's reasons are, and let me begin with those who are in the minority. Let's hear first from the defense. Died, still it would be objectionable.
Yes, to me personally. I feel like it all depends on one's personal morals. And
it was all right. Suppose there were a lottery, cabin boy lost, and the rest of the story unfolded. Then how many people would say it was morally permissible? So the numbers are rising if we had a lottery. Let's hear from one of you for whom the lottery would make a moral difference. Why would it?
I think the essential element in my mind that makes it a crime is the idea that they decided at some point that their lives were more important than his. And
3-to-1 or whatever the ratio was.
Right.
And I think that if he was making a decision to give his life, then he took on the agency to sacrifice himself, which some people might see as admirable, and other people might disagree with that decision.
So if he came up with the idea, that's the only kind of consent we could have confidence in morally, then it would be okay. Otherwise, yes, tell us why. Stand up.
I think that Parker would be killed with the hope that the other crew members would be rescued. So there's no definite reason that he should be killed, because you don't know when they're going to get rescued. So if you kill him, it's killing him in vain. Do you keep killing a crew member until you're rescued and then you're left with no one?